Hey, last week I mentioned it. I want to say it again this week. Thanks again to all of the amazing volunteers. Some of you were a little nervous when I made my Red Bull comment last week. I've switched from Red Bull to caffeinated tea this week. Everything's good. But once again, thank you to so many of the volunteers that came through this week, helped with the beautiful flooring, and they just did an amazing job. So, yeah, awesome. Appreciate you guys. Love you guys for that. Well, listen, if you got your Bibles, we're in Exodus chapter 2. It's printed on the back of your notes there, or if you got it on your mobile device, your fake Bible, that you can use that too. That's right. But here's where we're at. Exodus chapter 1, we were introduced to the life of this remarkable ancient man by the name of Moses. And in chapter 1, we got the backstory to God's plan to redeem and save his people. We've been saying all along that God, although at times may seem absent, don't mistake his absence for silence. God is always working underneath the surface. God uses everything to accomplish his purposes. And so here's where we're at in the story. The Israelites have migrated from Canaan to Egypt. And while in Egypt, they were very prosperous. In fact, within about 400 years, they moved from being just a very small tribe to having well over 1 million people, 1 million Israelites within Egypt's borders. Of course, the Pharaoh, king of Egypt, realizes this could be a problem. If our enemies attack us and are able to convince the Israelites to join them, we now have an enemy within our own borders. We can't have that. So he decides to get rid of them. His method for doing that is to work them to death. He assigns taskmasters. Instantly, overnight, life changes for the Israelites. We read it in chapter 1. I didn't give you the literal translation of a particular verse there in chapter 1, but let me give it to you now because it's a play on words, but it fits well life for the Israelites under Egyptian rule at this time. Reads like this: the Egyptians made the Israelites bitter with serving. With every kind of serving, they made them serve. Pharaoh was, in effect, the Hitler of his day. He forced them to make 2 massive storehouse cities, which you can actually visit to this day. There's actually an ancient Egyptian hieroglyph that depicts an Egyptian taskmaster with a whip in his hand, and he's whipping 2 slaves, and the caption reads, "Work and do not faint." And here's the problem. That's exactly what happened. In trying to oppress the Israelites, they began to thrive. They multiplied. There were even more of them. So now Pharaoh decides, I got to come up with something extra diabolical now to get rid of them. So he approaches the Egyptian midwives. These are the ladies who help the Hebrew women give birth. And he says to them, here's what I want you to do. When you're there helping the Hebrew women give birth to their children, if it's a male, kill it. Kill it. Choke it. Do whatever you need to do. Oh, I'm sorry, your baby boy is dead. But the Egyptian midwives feared God more than they feared Pharaoh. And they said, no, we're not going to do it. Pharaoh then is forced to make a decree to the people saying, if anyone sees a Hebrew baby boy, throw it into the Nile. That is the backdrop to Exodus chapter 2. That's how Exodus chapter 1 ends. Now, if you've ever had a circumstance in your life that you feel is just absolutely insurmountable, how is God going to work through this? All hope is lost. Here's what happens. Here's what God is about to do. God is about to take a genocidal, infanticidal decree meant to wipe out his people, and he's going to use that decree to be the very thing that raises up a hero. He's going to use what Pharaoh thinks will be the end of the Israelites to, in fact, be their salvation. And here's how it works in Exodus chapter 2, verse 1. Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. So what you're being told in this verse is that Moses has a little bit of royal blood in him, in the sense that the Levites were a tribe of Israel from Levi, and they were special assistants to the priests. This is Moses' mom and dad. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. The phrase fine child in the original language is a really interesting phrase. It's a bit difficult to understand. It means more than he was just a beautiful baby. It seems to have the connotation that his parents look at this boy and they realize not only is he beautiful in form and figure, but there's something special about him. There's something special about this baby. And they hide him when he's 3 months old. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. So after 3 months, perhaps the kid's lungs get a little bit bigger and his cries get a little bit louder. And now all of a sudden the entire family is in jeopardy if it's realized that there's a Hebrew baby under their roof. By the way, these bulrushes, bitumen, and pitch, these are all common things that can be found on the banks of the Nile River. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the river bank. So the child is hidden, but safe from the shore. And his sister, he has an older sister. She's not a teenager yet. She's still a young girl. Picture this now. You have to picture this scene. I mean, the narrative in the Old Testament is remarkable. Picture this mom and this dad realizing what's happening and forcing their hand to release this child into the Nile. And now his older sister is observing what's going to happen. Now, I think this is as much an act of trust and faith as it is anything else, and I'll show you why in a moment. Placed it amongst the reeds by the riverbank, and his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. As a parent, this is just hard to picture this scene. It's hard to imagine doing this. Based on Hebrews chapter 11, recounting this action, verse 23, we're told that Moses' parents do realize there's something special about this boy. So I think this is as much an act of trust and faith as it is anything else. But through this act of trust and faith, something remarkable is about to happen. In their lives, they're going to have a very, very big God story. So I first met my wife, Jill, when she was 5 days old. True story. I was 10 months old. Jill was 5 days old. She's adopted. And at the time, my dad was part of the hospitality team at church. And so part of his responsibility was to visit new parents. And so when he found out that the Leatherwoods had adopted a baby girl, he took me with him on the visitation. Now, what I'm about to tell you next was told by more than one person at our engagement party with the friends of our parents. Here's what was said. At 10 months old, I made my way over to Jill's crib. And I pulled myself up. And I looked inside. And apparently she rolled over and she looked at me. I don't know if a 5-year-old can see yet, but she did, trust me. She looked at me. And someone in the room, we don't know exactly who, but someone in the room said, look at those two. They could get married someday. Whoever that was a prophet. 21 years later, I married her. 24 years after that, I'm 46 years old. And I don't know, that whole midlife crisis thing. All of a sudden, I'm kind of feeling it. Now, Jill and I together in pastoral ministry, we've had a lot of God stories. But I kind of woke up one morning and I realized, man, I'm 46. I've been in pastoral ministry for 20 plus years, and I may only have another 20 plus years in me at best. 20 years, I'll be 66, I'll be in the game for over 40 years. That's a long time. And we'd had God stories. but we wanted more. And we wanted bigger ones. And so we began to talk. We began to pray. And then we began to encounter some people that had the same ideas and hopes and dreams for the north end of the valley, greater Phoenix, the state, the country, the world. And that is to start a new work of God. And so the more we thought about it, the more we prayed about it, we thought, well, what if we were to do something that was destined to fail unless God showed up? What would that be? That seems pretty big, but it's just destined to fail unless God has to show up. What about starting a church? I'll tell you this, the culture is not asking for you. The powers of darkness are going to fight against you. Let's do it. Sign us up. So alongside others, Illuminate Community Church, you're here because some people made a basket, put themselves inside, and placed themselves in the river, not knowing exactly what the outcome was going to be, but having faith and trust in God. They're about to have a massive God story, by the way. So are we. Now, there's probably something in your life right now that God is calling you to do. But you're afraid. You're fearful. By the way, you know what the most often repeated command in the Bible is? Do not fear. You think it would be love one another or serve one another. No, it's do not fear. That's the most often repeated command in the Bible, do not fear. God is calling you to do something, to step out of your comfort zone, but you're afraid. And what it boils down to is it's your fear of man, fear of what others will think, or it's a fear of failure. Sarah Blakely is one of America's youngest billionaires. And I heard her interviewed about a year ago. And she said, you know how it all happened for me? She said, it happened for me when I was a little girl sitting around the dinner table with my parents and my brother. And almost weekly, my dad would ask us the question, what have you failed at this week? What have you failed at? And she said, well, you know, Dad, I tried out for this and I failed. And she said, I would be celebrated. Every failure that I had, my dad would celebrate it. And what was he celebrating? The fact that I attempted something, that I stepped out of my comfort zone, and I took a risk. And she said, now for me, growing up, failure became the womb of success. I saw failure as just a means to an end. If I fail at this, that means that there's going to be something else, but I have no fear of failure. It fed and fueled my entrepreneurial spirit. I mentioned it a couple weeks ago, but it's worth saying now. There was a massive study conducted by a major university asking people what they regret in life. And so when people look back over small increments of time, day to day, they regret taking action. You know what? I shouldn't have had that 20th donut hole at church this morning. I regret that. 19, 20, not too much. I regret that. But when people look back over their lives, over the decades, it's not action they regret. It's inaction. It's, you know, I had the chance to change careers when I was in my 40s, and I just didn't do it. You know why? I was just afraid. I was fearful. I had the chance to pursue a relationship, and I didn't, and I regret that. It's inaction. Now, having said that, let me say this, because there's going to be a room full of people here, myself included. We look back over our lives and we think, if only I would have done this differently, my life wouldn't be where it is now. I messed up. I messed it up. Let me tell you, it really is impossible for you to mess up your life with the decisions you make. I'm going to say it again. It's true. It's impossible for you to mess up your life with the decisions you make, as long as you recognize the mistake and turn in obedience toward God. This is the story of Moses. You're going to see a guy that makes mistake after mistake. And if there's ever a guy to sort of hang his head and have it in his hands and say, oh, I just can't believe how I've messed things up, there's a point in his life where he recognizes his mistakes, turns to God in obedience, and begins doing things God's way. And then here's the remarkable thing that happens. You begin to see how God weaves it all together. All of those actions that you regret, God redeems and uses to make you who you are for his purposes. So here's what happens next. His sister, standing at a distance, to know what happened to him. The daughter of Pharaoh comes down to bathe at the river. Now, the Egyptians had many, many gods. One of their predominant gods, well, the sun god was first and foremost, but another predominant god was the god of the Nile. So if she comes down to bathe, she's also there to worship. And by the way, Pharaohs had a lot of daughters. They had a lot of kids. Ramses II had 60 daughters. They had many wives. They had concubines. One of the daughters comes down to bathe at the river, while her young women walked beside the river. Now, remember, Moses' sister, she's young, she's not yet a teenager, she's just standing there observing what's going to happen. Now, I think at this point, she probably has one of two reactions. Either she's going, oh no, Pharaoh's daughter, this is really bad. Or she's thinking, this couldn't be any better. Pharaoh's daughter. We don't know exactly, but we know that the girl, she's clever. She saw the basket among the reeds, Pharaoh's daughter did, and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him. You can see sort of this motherly instinct, this heart within this woman. And she said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Yeah, she knows that because her dad said, throw him into the Nile. Someone did. She's found one. Then Moses' sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, she kind of appears, right? You just kind of see her stepping forward. Oh, it's not a baby. I have an idea. Shall I go call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you? Now, that may seem kind of odd. This was a very common practice back in the day, especially for nobility. A princess would give birth to a child, and then a wet nurse would care for the child all the way up until the time the child was weaned, which is going to sound odd to you, to us as Americans, but that could be when the child's 6, 7, 8 years old is when the child was weaned, right? Gets a little strange when your 7-year-old is telling you, I'm hungry. That's how it was, okay? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. So the girl went and called the child's mother. So now, you see what's happening? Moses' own mother is there to nurse him. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. Moses' mom is not only nursing him and will raise him for the first several years of his life, but she's getting paid to do so. Some of you moms are like, how do I get in on that deal? So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, again, probably 6, 7, 8 years old, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. Wow. Hard for me to describe what life is going to be like for Moses. He's living within the palace walls. He is a son to Pharaoh. He's riding around in chariots. He's getting the best education. And by the way, the Egyptians were very, very strong academically. They excelled in the sciences. He will get the best food. He will get the best education. But he also needed that time with mom and dad to understand who the Hebrew God was. Without that time with mom and dad, he's not going to come to understand his identity, his true identity. But for now, he's an Egyptian in Pharaoh's house. And she named him Moses because she said, I drew him out of the water. And the name or word Moses literally means to draw out of the water. Now, before we read what's next, we need to understand Moses is an interesting individual because he's got one foot in the Israelite camp and he's got one foot in the Egyptian camp. He's a prince of Egypt with all the rights, titles, and authorities therein. But he's also a prince of Israel. And he's about to find out it's very hard. In fact, it's going to be impossible to be both at the same time. One day, when Moses had grown up, and according to Acts chapter 7, he's 40 years old now, he went out to his people, the Israelites, and he looked on their burdens. So you have to imagine him. He's got the full Egyptian regalia on. Perhaps he even has somewhat of an entourage with him. And he looks at their struggles. Then he sees something. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looks one way. He looks the other. And he strikes him down. He kills him. And then what's he do? He buries him in the sand. Now, it may seem like a cruel act, and it is, but not out of the ordinary for someone of his status. It wasn't necessarily wrong for a prince of Egypt to kill a commoner, and that's what he does. Maybe a little slap on the hand, kind of like, oh, hey, Moses, you know how you get when you're around those taskmasters, right? They make you angry. Just stay away from them, right? Just don't do that again. He buries him in the sand. When he went out the next day, behold, two Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man in the wrong, why do you strike your companion? In other words, he says, look, you know you're wrong. Why fight back? He answered, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Who gives you the right to tell us what to do? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid and thought, surely the thing is known. It's become known. It's very difficult to keep your sins hidden. When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. Why? Because Moses has now chosen his true identity. He's defended the Israelite and killed the Egyptian. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian. The Midianites were distant relatives of the Israelites. One of Abraham's sons was named Midian, the Midianites. And he sits down by a well. Well, goodbye palace walls. Goodbye the best of what the known world at that time has to offer. That's gone. He'll have none of it. I just kind of picture him in the middle of the desert. Instead of these fine tapestries and all the best of life, he's surrounded by sand and sagebrush. And he's leaning against the well, perhaps just to get some shade. And his head is in his hands, and he's thinking, what have I done? I've really messed things up. In Acts chapter 7, it tells us what he was thinking. It says that as he committed this act, when he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brothers, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them being wrong, he defended the oppressed man and avenged him by striking down the Egyptian. And here's what was going through his mind. He supposed that his brothers would understand that God was giving them salvation by his hand. But they didn't get it. They didn't get it. All he's trying to do is prove himself to be their deliverer in this act. And they're like, what? See, there's a big difference between doing things your way and doing things God's way. He committed murder. That would not have been God's plan to establish his leadership. You see, he had leadership, but he lacked character. And so you know what God is going to do? Desert time for you, dude. And don't we know what that's like? Right? You're proud and you're arrogant. Yeah, you're my guy, but if it's going to happen, it's going to happen my way, not your way. Don't take matters in your hands like that. And you know what that does? That proves what's really inside your heart. Desert. Barrenness. Sitting next to a well. He's hot. He's sweaty. He's down and out. My life is over. It's ruined. You know what? God remembered him because God isn't finished with him. It's remarkable. The author of Acts will divide the life of Moses into 3 sections. First 40 years, second 40 years, and third 40 years. First 40 years, he's proud and arrogant, man. He's the man. He does what he wants when he wants it his way. Yeah, I'll be my people's savior, and I'll show them. Ooh, that backfired. And he's going to spend the next 40 years in the desert in humility, being humbled, being laid low. Then he's going to spend the last 40 years of his life realizing what God can do with him. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. One thing you can say about Moses is the dude has a very high sense of justice. When he sees a wrong, he wants to correct it. But watch this, he's learning. He's different. He sees injustice again, but he deals with it differently. He doesn't use murder or violence. The shepherds came, and Moses drove them away. Notice what else he does. You see it? He serves them. He waters their flock. This is a different guy. He's beginning to change. When they came home to their father Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come home so soon today? Usually you're waiting, and you're not back till later." They said, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds and even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Then where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him that he may eat bread." In other words, that's another way of saying, I really like this guy. This is a really good man. Bring him back. And Moses was content to dwell with the man. And he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. That's a great name, Zipporah. Anybody here pregnant and about to have a baby girl? Just pray about it. Think about it. Zippy. It's cute. She gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom. We'll just go over that one. For he said, "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land." That's what Gershom means. So what this tells you is that Moses, it's really interesting, he names his son after the way he's feeling about his circumstance. In other words, what he's saying is every time he looks at that boy Gershom, and when he calls him his name, he's reminding himself, hey, this is not where I'm supposed to be. These are not really my people. This is not my homeland. I am a foreigner in a foreign land. And this boy is actually proof of that because he was born in a foreign land. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery, and they cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. What covenant is that? We find it in Genesis chapter 15, verses 13 through 14. So when we started this series on heroes a couple months ago, we started with Abraham. And the reason why we started in the Garden of Eden, setting giving the ultimate backstory to God's plan to redeem mankind. Adam and Eve are in the garden, the most perfect environment. They're tempted, they fall into sin. Their relationship with God is disrupted. If you have kids, you know what that's like. What kind of relationship do you have with your kids when they're constantly disobeying you? It's not a good one. God says, I got to do for them what they can't do for themselves. I got to make this right so we can restore this relationship. And so then we begin to see for the first time in seed form the gospel, where he says, one is going to come forth from a woman. One will be born from a woman that will conquer the deeds of Satan. In Genesis chapter 12, God visits a man named Abraham, and he says, Abraham, you're my guy. One is going to come forth from you, one of your descendants, and he will be the ultimate hero. Through him, all people on earth will be blessed. The rest of the Bible, important for you to know, the rest of the Bible, the Old Testament, everything found in the New Testament, it's all in the Old Testament. The rest of the Bible is the playing out of this redemptive story. So that's why we read about this promise that God remembers after hearing the groaning of his people. And it was a promise made hundreds of years earlier to Abram. Later his name is changed to Abraham, same guy. Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and they will be servants there, just as God promised. We're talking hundreds of years before this happened. And they will be afflicted for 400 years. He's talking about Egypt. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. You see, God had this plan in the works, and we've talked about this before. God's timing is so unlike our timing, and that's so hard. Hundreds of years go by. God remembers the promise, and he says, oh, no, don't. The promise still stands. Do not mistake my silence for absence, my absence for silence. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen in my timing. And I'm going to use one of, if not the most powerful man in the world, that is Pharaoh, to bring about my purposes. Because that's how powerful and how sovereign I am. What he tried to do, I'm going to flip it on him. And I'm going to use it for my purposes. Proverbs says, the heart of a man is like water in God's hands, directing it where he wants to go. Fear no man. Fear no man. And so God remembers the promise. And this sets the stage for what happens next. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. A little bit of a cliffhanger there. We'll leave the burning bush for next week. But let's talk about what we learn from this section of Moses' life. I mentioned it earlier, and I really don't know a better way of saying this, but I'll say it again. You really cannot ruin your life. You know, as I've read through the Bible many, many times, I can't find one episode of instant effectiveness for God. There's always some sort of training. There's always some sort of proving ground. Maybe Daniel. Daniel might be the one guy. But in virtually every other person whom God uses, there is no instant effectiveness. There is some kind of training ground. And for Moses, this occurred when he was, believe it or not, 40 years old. He did not learn until he was 40 years old, until God takes him out into the wilderness and begins to, in a sense, bruise him and bring him low. I wrote it down like this. Sometimes obeying God looks like death. It looks like wilderness. And those are the moments when you can know that God is drawing you out. Pride is being stripped away from you. Your functional saviors, your false idols are crashing down. And it can be painful. It can be dry. It can be barren. But here's what you need to know. It's leading to liberation. And so Moses will be 80 years old when the next stage of his life kicks in. He spends the first 40 years thinking he's the man. He's going to spend the next 40 years realizing he's a nobody. And then when he's 80, the last 40 years of his life, he's going to experience exactly what God can do with a nobody. Every single person in this room is in one of those three life stages. What is it for you? You might think you're somebody. Be careful. You might be in that desert place where God is bringing you low and it feels like death, but it's about to lead to liberation. Or you may be in that stage where you're beginning to realize, wow, look what God can do with little old me. Look what God can do with me. Secondly, gain the right identity. Moses said, look, here's the deal. I belong to God. I made a commitment to be an Israelite. Therefore, I count myself with the people of God. This is all about your identity. And here's the very powerful thing about identity. Identity will get you to do things you would otherwise never do. Who do you think you are? You know, you function based on who you think you are. And so I love the fact that Moses says, I'm going to get it straight. I've got Hebrew blood in me. Therefore, I am loyal to the Hebrew God. So last Saturday, I was driving with my daughter, and I said, hey, let's have a little fun. Let's see if we can identify, by virtue of all the different car stickers, where people find their identity. Here's what we discovered. Y'all are proud of your families. Y'all have your political affiliations. You're proud of the university that you attended. Really proud of your children's achievements. And Star Wars. Couldn't tell you how many Star Wars stickers we saw, right? But here's the thing. Each sticker is what? It's a declaration. Hey, this is what I'm about. This is what I'm into. Now, that may seem kind of benign to you, but you'll realize that's what it is. Do you know, look, you're being preached at more than just on Sunday mornings, okay? The culture is constantly sending you a message. This is what I'm about. You should be about that too. This is how I identify myself. Are we in the same tribe? If so, we'll speak the same language. That's the great thing about Christianity. It transcends all of that. And in the midst of all of our diversity, there's unity. That's what Jesus does. So he gets the right identity. He says, I belong to God, and he is for me. And so this is how it is for you and me. And it goes back to what we said earlier. If you know that your identity is rooted in God, then it frees you up to say, hey, what are the God stories in my life? What are they? Then that frees you up to say, I'm going to build a basket, and I'm going to get inside, I'm going to float myself down the river. I don't exactly know where this is going to end, but I know who controls the path of the water. And yeah, it's a risk, but that's where the God stories come in. Yeah, it's way out of my comfort zone, but that's where the God stories come in. Thirdly and lastly, and I'll end with this. The only thing that will enable you to endure hardship from other people, and quite frankly from the people of God, is looking directly to God. Now, the author of Hebrews, in Hebrews chapter 11, he makes a remarkable statement about Moses, and it really kind of surprises you. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 24, it says this: by faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. This is when he was grown up. When he got older, he makes this identity, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. Ooh, that's a great way to describe it. Fleeting pleasures of sin. And what happened to Moses? The people whom he gave everything up for, they rejected him. He considered the reproach of Christ, which is really interesting. If we had time, it's a whole other sermon. It's almost as if what the author of Hebrews is saying is Moses was considering Jesus through this whole thing. Now you say, how does that happen? Remember the verse we read last week in Luke chapter 9, the transfiguration? Jesus is transfigured, but he's with two other individuals. One is Elijah. Who's the other one? Moses. And what does it say? They were talking about his departure. That word for departure is the word Exodus. That's so good. So here's Moses. We think, oh, Moses is the Exodus man. No, don't be mistaken. Moses' Exodus was for a certain time, certain period. Now he's with Jesus, and he's like, Jesus, you got the floor. You got the floor. The Exodus you just ushered in was for everybody. It's not limited to one time, one place. You just set everybody free through your death on the cross. And they're having this conversation about Jesus' Exodus. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Wait a minute now. We see that the people were not his motivation. Ooh, people were not his identity. It's what God had for him. By faith, he left Egypt. Look at this. Not being afraid of the anger of the king. You know why he ran away? It wasn't because he was afraid. It wasn't out of fear. What was it then? How did he last? He endured as seeing him who is invisible. Do you understand how important that phrase is? That's how he made it. He kept his eyes on God through this whole thing. And the more he kept his eyes on God, the more he became transformed into the incredible man that God will use. He was trusting in God, the one who would steer his life in the right direction as he displayed obedience. And by the way, that's the same thing that's going to sustain you too. Let's pray. Father, what a rich text. Wow. Every single week, these examples, they're just powerful. Father, I pray for myself, for those in this room, that your Spirit would reveal to us where we're at in this story. First 40, second 40, third 40. And that by the grace of God, we would continue to move into that place where we have the joy of saying, isn't it amazing? Look what God is doing through someone like me. Father, for those who don't yet know you or even capable of having that experience, I pray that your Spirit would continue to draw them, that they would know who Jesus is, that their lives would be transformed and recognize their true identity, who you made them to be. We pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. And God's people said, amen.